It's March 30th, 1971. Three young guys with barely any business experience and just over $1,000 each are standing inside a tiny storefront in Seattle, nervously waiting for their first customer. They're not selling coffee drinks. They're not offering lattes or cappuccinos. In fact, the business model that would eventually turn Starbucks into a $90 billion empire didn't even exist yet. And here's the twist that nobody talks about. The man who actually created the Starbucks we know today wasn't even there on opening day. He wouldn't walk through those doors for another 10 years. So how did a small coffee bean shop started by three literature-loving dreamers with no business background transform into the global phenomenon that changed how the entire world drinks coffee? The answer involves a serendipitous trip to Italy, a rejected vision, a bold gamble, and one of the most remarkable turnaround stories in business history. This is the hidden history behind the birth of Starbucks. Let's rewind to where this story truly begins. Jerry Baldwin was an English teacher. Gordon Boker was a writer. Zev Siegel was a history teacher. These three friends from the University of San Francisco were in their 20s, passionate about the arts, literature, and one thing that would change their lives. Really good coffee. In the early 1970s, American coffee was, to put it bluntly, terrible. Most people drank weak, stale, low-grade coffee scooped from a can and weekly percolated at home. The three friends had discovered something completely different during trips to Berkeley, California, where a Dutch immigrant named Alfred Peet had opened a specialty coffee shop called Peet's Coffee and Tea. Peet was roasting high-quality Arabica beans with a dark, rich flavor that was revolutionary for the American market. The trio became obsessed. They wanted to bring this coffee experience to Seattle, a city that in 1971 was nothing like the cultural hub it is today. You couldn't even get a New York Times in Seattle back then. But Baldwin, Boker, and Siegel believed that once people tasted truly great coffee, they would never go back. So they took a massive risk. Each invested $1,350 of their own money, borrowed $5,000 from a bank, and started building their dream. They did the carpentry themselves in Siegel's parents' basement, building counters and shelving, handled the electrical work, and painted everything by hand. They were literally building Starbucks with their own two hands. But here's a fascinating detail. Most people don't know they almost didn't call it Starbucks. During brainstorming sessions with advertising partner Terry Heckler, Boker suggested words starting with "est" because he believed those sounds were powerful in successful brands. Initially, Gordon Boker wanted to name the company Pequod, after the ship in Herman Melville's classic novel Moby Dick. But Heckler had a problem with that. Would anyone really want to drink a cup of Pequod? During research into mining camps on Mount Rainier, they came across Starbo, which eventually led them back to Moby Dick, where they discovered the perfect name Starbuck, the first made on the Pequod. The name evoked the seafaring tradition of early coffee traders' adventure and a connection to the Pacific Northwest. On March 30, 1971, they opened at 2000 Western Avenue near Peg Place Market. Their first customer was Dan Chasson with his 2-year-old daughter Sarah. The founders brewed him a free sample, held aromatic beans under his nose, and described coffee from Ethiopia, Colombia, and Guatemala. Chasson bought Sumatra at $1.75 per pound. A friend brought wine to celebrate, and they all shared it together. That's how Starbucks began, intimate, handmade, selling only beans and equipment, not drinks. For the first 2 years, they didn't roast their own beans. Alfred Peet supplied them with roasted coffee, teaching them his techniques. In 1973, Peet stopped supplying Starbucks and instead helped train their new roast master, Jim Reynolds. The founders bought a used roaster from Holland and experimented with Peet's techniques to create their own unique blends. By the late 1970s, Starbucks had established a devoted following. Tourists visiting Pike Place Market discovered this unique coffee shop and started spreading the word. The company developed a mail-order business because visitors from other cities couldn't find anything like it back home. People talked about Starbucks far beyond Seattle as if it were some iconic brand, even though it was still just a few small stores. But the company struggled. In 1976, they opened a store in Edmonds that bombed completely. The manager was buying pots and pans herself just to boost sales. Then their original building was scheduled to be torn down, forcing them to relocate to 1912 Pike Place, which is where the so-called original Starbucks still stands today. With coffee prices soaring and retail sales down 25%, they needed a $95,000 line of credit just to stay afloat. In 1980, Zev Siegel left the company to pursue other interests, leaving Baldwin and Boker to carry on. By 1984, they had expanded to 6 stores, all in Seattle, all still just selling beans and equipment. That's where they planned to stay. Enter Howard Schultz. In 1981, a young New Yorker working as a sales representative for a Swedish housewares company called Hammarplast noticed something unusual. A tiny coffee shop in Seattle was placing extraordinarily large orders for drip coffee makers. Curious, Schultz decided to visit the store himself. When he walked into Starbucks at Pike Place Market, something magical happened. He was captivated by the founders' passion for coffee, their meticulous approach to sourcing and roasting, and the equity of the brand despite its small size. Schultz saw potential far beyond Seattle. He was so smitten that he quit his job and convinced the founders to hire him as Director of Retail Operations and Marketing in 1982. The following year, 1983, changed everything. Schultz traveled to Milan for a trade show. Walking from his hotel, he encountered coffee bar after coffee bar. He stepped inside and experienced Italian espresso culture. It wasn't just about coffee, it was the entire experience. The warmth, community, skilled baristas, conversations over espresso. He visited over 500 espresso bars during that trip. Milan had 1,500 coffee houses serving as third places between home and work. Schultz realized Starbucks was in the wrong part of the coffee business. He resolved to transform it into a place offering not just beans but an experience, a community gathering space. When Schultz returned to Seattle, he convinced the founders to test the concept. Starbucks typically served 200 to 300 customers daily. Within the first week of serving espresso drinks, they had 500 customers, but the founders weren't convinced. They wanted to remain bean retailers. Frustrated, Schultz left in 1985 to start Il Giornale. He secured funding from investors, including Bill Gates. Succeeded. In 1987, Baldwin and Boker sold Starbucks. Schultz acquired it for $3.8 million and merged it with Il Giornale. He changed aprons from brown to green and began aggressive expansion. That year, Starbucks opened outside Seattle and Vancouver and Chicago. What happened next was meteoric. In 1987, Starbucks had 11 stores. By 1989, 46 locations across the western United States and Canada. When Starbucks went public in 1992, it had 140 stores and $73 million in revenue. By the time Schultz stepped down as CEO in 2000, there were 3,500 stores in more than a dozen countries. Schultz transformed Starbucks into more than a coffee company. He created what he called the third place, a comfortable space between home and work where people could gather, work, and connect. He introduced groundbreaking employee benefits, including comprehensive healthcare and stock options for part-time workers, revolutionizing how retail companies treated their employees. Today, Starbucks operates over 38,000 locations in 80 countries. That tiny coffee bean shop, started by 3 literature-loving dreamers with almost no business experience, has become a global phenomenon worth $90 billion. It all happened because 3 young men believed Seattle deserved better coffee, and one determined visionary refused to accept no for an answer. The Starbucks story isn't just about business success. It's about vision clashing with convention, persistence in the face of rejection, and how one person's trip to Italy changed the way millions around the world experience coffee. So the next time you walk into a Starbucks or any modern coffee shop, remember this hidden history. Remember the English teacher, the writer, and the history teacher who built counters in a basement. Remember Alfred Peet, who taught them to roast beans. Remember that first customer with his daughter sharing wine on opening day. And especially remember Howard Schultz, walking Milan streets, visiting 500 coffee bars, daring to imagine something that didn't yet exist in America. Their story reminds us that the biggest transformations often come from the smallest beginnings, and that sometimes all it takes is one person with a vision to change the world. If you found this story fascinating, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the hidden histories behind the brands that shape our lives. Drop a comment and tell us which company's origin story you'd like us to explore next. Give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone who loves a great underdog story. Thanks for watching.